Shout out to my latest subscribers. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and giving me some of your attention out of your day. So you guys are the ones that keep me going, and I really appreciate you guys' support. Hey Defenders, welcome back. So in the last video, we installed the Hive, which is our security operations center, and will host our alerts, will host our cases, and is the tool that we use to interact with our alerts and provide updates and observables and allow us to interact with our teammates seamlessly and effortlessly. And however, we're still kind of missing one piece of the puzzle, which is automating our observable analysis, right? So in the last video, we added observables to our cases where we added a particular domain and an IP address in that example, right? And these observables are metadata that are linked to alerts that are affecting your network, right? So for example, I could see that this IP address 8.8.8.8 maybe triggered a web application firewall rule, right? And now this alert has been brought into the Hive, and yeah, we're making our lives easier for the SOC analysts, but there's still some automation that we can add. And so what does that mean exactly? So we're able to run observables through analysis tools, and those analysis tools being threat feed providers such as Virustotal, Abuse, IPDB, Joe Sandbox, Who Is Information. There's a ton of feeds out there that we can take advantage of, and that's exactly what we're looking to do with this tool. So at the click of a button, we'll be able to receive immediate intelligence around the observable, and we're able to quickly tune out immediate threats or not. So going back to our observable, let's say 8.8.8, we run our analysis on, and it comes back as an immediate threat, right? So now all of a sudden a generic alert that may have just come into the queue now has a higher severity, and we may escalate that up to take appropriate action, right? So we're now able to get immediate analysis on some of our observables. And the tool that does that is called Cortex. The guys behind the Hive are also responsible for this tool. And the big value add that Cortex is we're able to now make API calls to various threat intelligence feeds and collect the results all at the click of a button. So making our analysis job a lot easier and a lot faster. Now I'm not having to go to Google to do a who is on 8.8.8.8, right? Or go to Abuse IPDB or Virustotal through a browser and input all my data that way. Now with just a few clicks, we can automate this process for us. And so in this demo, I want to install Cortex. We will install Cortex's analyzers, so more to come on that here in a bit. We will log in and configure our analyzers, and then we'll run a few gather intelligence demos. So stick around and we'll jump into it. And okay, so Cortex also has a installation guide that's on GitHub. I will link to it in the description below. So if you want to follow along, you can follow that hyperlink down below. And I am going to install this on the same box that we installed the Hive on in the previous video. You don't have to. You can distribute this to its own dedicated server if you want to. So I could have one server running the Hive and one server running Cortex. That's fine. You can do that. But just for this demo, since I have a small environment, I'm just going to install them on the same box. And immediately you notice that version 3.1 and later of Cortex, which is what we'll be installing here, supports only Elasticsearch 7.x. So really the only prereq that we really need to do before running a yum install of Cortex is to make sure we have Elasticsearch 7.x. So I will actually go over to Wazoo's documentation of they already have the repo for Elasticsearch 7.x configured. So I'm just going to take advantage of this. So I'll copy, or well, I'll first import the GPG key. So that looks good. And then I will add the repo. And then I will just do a yum install Elasticsearch. And I'll just do this 711.2. That's fine. And then while that's installing, let's go ahead and scroll down because I believe there are a few changes we need to add to the Elasticsearch.yaml file. And yeah, here we go here. Okay, so let's install this. Once it's installed, we're really only changing, so the host, they're just changing this to the local host. I will just add the IP address of this server. Cluster name will set to the Hive. And they recommend increasing this queue size for performance. So, all right, now that we have Elasticsearch installed, let's go ahead and jump into the Elasticsearch.yaml file. And for the cluster name, we will go ahead and uncomment that out and say, Hive. Path to data, that's good. That's all good. That's all good. Network host, I will set to 192.168.1.181, which is the IP address of the server here. Our port, yeah, we can leave at default. That's fine. That's fine. Let's go ahead and actually configure our master node because we will get a complaint whenever we try to restart. So I'll actually uncomment the node name. So we'll just leave it at node 1. That's fine. The master node, I will go ahead and specify node 1. That's good. And then that should be everything to get us started up accordingly. And then I will just add this thread pool size in there. And let's do a, let me make sure it's not running, which it shouldn't be. Okay, good. Now let's go ahead and start Elasticsearch and make sure that starts up accordingly. And while that's starting up, I'll just assume that it comes up okay. Hopefully I'm not biting my tongue. And then we will get started with the Cortex install and config up here. Again, this is a CentOS box on my right here. They have instructions for if you're going the Debian distribution route as well. So you can follow this guide along if you're just going with another distribution of Linux. And this is starting up. Hopefully. Okay, and that looks to have started up. Let's run a status, and that looks like it's running. So let me just tail the file here of Elasticsearch just to make sure everything looks okay. And yeah, that all looks fine. Okay, good. So now let's go ahead and install Cortex. So we can point to the same repo that we used to install the Hive. So in the previous video that we already added this repo, so this should still be here. Yep, and that looks good. So now I'll just run a yum install Cortex. And again, they say the legacy repo of Cortex, which is 3.0.1, does not support Elasticsearch version 7, but version 6. We're using Cortex version 3.1. As you can see here, we're bringing that in here. And so that requires Elasticsearch 7X. All right, and that's installed. So now let's go ahead and make sure we can get our first start working correctly. So I should be able to run like a status of Cortex. Yep, let me see, it's not loaded. So what we need to make sure that we have is the key to the server, which is this play HTTP secret.key. This authenticates Cortex, and especially if you're running Cortex within a cluster mode, so you can also cluster Cortex, they all must share the same key. All right, and so if we go into Etsy, into Cortex, we'll see our application.conf file, and if we open this guy up, you'll see they have commented out this secret key that we need to do, which is fine. So all we need to do is copy this command here, and it will now generate a secret key for us and put it within our application file down at the bottom, I believe. Yep. And so now we have this entry added here. So you just need to copy and paste that. Let's go ahead and scroll up and make sure everything looks okay with, let me see, with Elasticsearch. So Elasticsearch listens on port 9200. So I'll go ahead and copy that IP address and change that into here. And we're going to connect to Elasticsearch on our server here, which listens on port 9200. Again, you could connect to a cluster of Elasticsearch servers. You can also enable SSL if you want to connect to Elasticsearch that way as well. So you have the opportunity to do that there. And we're going to create an index of called Cortex, and Cortex will generate this for us automatically. And that really should be the only thing we need to do for now until we get into these analyzers and responders. So let's go ahead and save that off, and let's give this a test. So I'll go ahead and start Cortex, and similar to the Hive, we can tail the log file under var log cortex in application.log. And let's go ahead and tail this just to make sure it starts up correctly. All right, and here we see now Cortex is listening on port 9001. So, unlike the Hive that listens on port 9000, we can now connect to 9001, and we should now, okay, good. And so yeah, so upon your first start, you'll need to update the database. This will create the index for you. This will create the index and make sure to connect to Elasticsearch and a lot of just back-end stuff that it's doing on its own. So now we can create an administrator account. So I'll just call it admin, and I'll just do a password of admin. So I'll go ahead and create that. And now we get our Cortex login. So I'll say admin. And now we are in. And kind of similar to the Hive, we create organizations, and we'll add a user to that organization. So right off the bat, I will do an organization as demo and demo. I will save that. And now let's go into this organization, and let's add, I'll call the user just open secure. And please subscribe for the name, and I'll give it a role of read, analyze, and org admin. So I'll go ahead and save that off, and good. Okay, so we have the organization and a basic user stood up, but now we need to add our analyzers, right? So now if I jump back into our demo, we don't have any our demo organization, we don't have any analyzers, and the analyzers is what's responsible for making the API calls out to the various services. So let's go ahead and jump back into our docs here now that we have Elasticsearch running and Cortex. The basic functionality is working, the web UI creating organizations and adding users is working. Now let's really add the brains behind Cortex. And what this is they have a separate repo full of Cortex analyzers. So if I go into the analyzers folder here, these are all different tools that different users of the community have made integrations with Cortex. So you can see all of these guys, right? There's a ton of threat feeds, some that are commercial, some that are free to use. So you can also, pay for API access to some of these various threat feed providers, but we can now integrate with all of these different threat feeds here, which is really awesome. So let's first install some of the prereqs, and the analyzers and responders supported by the Hive are written in Python 2 or 3. So users within the community have the ability to create analyzers that take advantage of Python 2 or some with Python 3. Okay, so let me see if I already have these on there. So I have Python 2. Do I have pip? Oh. Do I have pip2? And it looks like I do. Yep. Do I have Python 3? I do not. So let me install Python 3. I don't know why. I guess because it was trying Python 3-dev and -pip, where Python, just installing Python 3 brings in Python pip as well. Let me see if I do a Python dev as well, if that brings in some things. All right, so let's go ahead and progress with this. Now that we have, really what we really need is make sure to have pip2 and pip3 installed. So we already have that, but let's make sure we have the setup tools for it. And I'm actually going to do, I'm going to hard specify pip2, 2 setup tools, and I'm going to say pip3 setup tools. So I'll go ahead and run that. All right, and that looks good. And now let's go ahead and clone this repo. So I will go into my op directory. I'll cd into Cortex. And yeah, I'll just clone the analyzers into here. So into this directory here. Get not found. All right, and let's try that again. So we are cloning the repo now. If I do a ls here, so we now have this Cortex Analyzers. And now what we're going to do is we're going to install all of the analyzers with pip2. So some require pip2 and some require pip3, which that's your different versions of Python. And so we have this simple just little script here that, well, it's really just a command, but will do this installment for us. And so let's go ahead and run this. Each analyzer comes with its own requirements.txt, right? So if we go into one of these, so cd into Cortex Analyzers, let's go into the abuse one, IPDB, and here we see a requirements.txt. And so this our pip2 and pip3 install will install these pip packages for us. And as you can see, there's a lot of analyzers, so they just done a basic little loop to make that easy for us. So now we will just copy that in and hit enter, and now it'll run off. And with the power of editing, I will skip to this process being done. Sometimes it can take a while. And so I will see you guys in a sec. Is done, and now what we need to do is jump back into our Cortex config file here, and if we page down a little bit, we have our analyzers. So here we can now we need to point to the path of our analyzers, and in this case, since we have them hosted just locally on the server, right? We just downloaded them. We will uncomment that, comment this guy, and grab the path to them. So let me cd into Cortex Analyzers and then Analyzers, and let me grab this guy here. And now if we specify this right here and restart, now Cortex should see our analyzers. So let's go ahead and do a restart of Cortex, and let's tail the log file again to make sure that it finds them. and it looks like it does because it sees them all here. So that looks good. Okay, and now if we go back into our UI here, and we'll just refresh, we may have gotten logged out. I will log in as the Open Security user. And again, now we have a little more on the web UI that we can add, right? So if I go into my analyzers, we should hopefully start to see them now when I go into organization, analyzers config, and within analyzers. So now we see we have 164 analyzers available to us, and we can choose to enable these for our organization. So for the first one, let's just do abuse IPDB. So I'll go ahead and select enable. And now much of this is predefined for us. All we need to do for some of these analyzers is configure an API key. So let me go to abuse IPDB and let me grab an API key. Now I've grabbed my API key and I'll just blur it out. Start out, and then I will hit save to enable it. And all right, so we have that analyzer now enabled. Let's see if we can quickly run a new analysis. So I'll just select the new analysis, and let's just make sure the functionality of this works. On the TLP, so you can set like the severity color if you want. Same with the PAP as well. So really you can leave these for whatever you want. And then for data type, since we only have one analyzer enabled, we'll just do, and the only data type this analyzer accepts is an IP address. We'll select IP, and once we do that, we see the analyzers that we have available that can read an IP address available for us. So now we'll do some data. So we'll say 8.8.8.8. Let's go ahead and start this. And now an analysis has kicked off. And we see the report as running. And if I go back, we should see a success. All right, so now I can view it. And now all of a sudden we get data back for this particular IP address, right? So if we go and we see the records that come back for this particular IP, and which is awesome. We did this in literally just a few seconds, right? Now let's add Virustotal, for example. So if I go back into my organization, I will select my analyzers. And if I scroll down, again, you see all of these different analyzers here that we can take advantage of, which is really awesome. And we can automate all of this, and it gets really complex, but man, it is so powerful to use. And hopefully these series of videos will help walk you guys through step by step, because I'm doing a lot of learning on the automation side of it as well. And I have a cool tool that I can't wait to introduce to you guys. And it's been really, really powerful and has been great. But before we get to that, let's first get really familiar with Cortex. And so let's enable this Virustotal get report. So again, I will go to Virustotal and grab my API key that I have. And I'll just blur that out so you guys can't see it. And all right, I have saved and enabled the Virustotal API. So now let's go back, and now let's run an analysis on not an IP address, but a hash value. Maybe we saw a file change that occurred within the network, and we want to analyze the hash value of it. So now for data type, let's go ahead and just say hash. Now so now you see the abuse IPDB analyzer is gone, but now we have the Virustotal analyzer here, right? So now let's select this guy, and well, I know this is a good one to test. I know this is a malicious hash. So let's copy and paste that here, select start, and now Virustotal job will run. And this should finish in just a few seconds, and we'll be able to view the report on that one as well. And so, all right, we have our results back. Let's go ahead and view it. And here we see the same thing. So we see 12 positive hits out of 61. And if we reflect back to our Virustotal UI, we see the same results. And we also get a lot of metadata around it, right? So the scans that have detected this, file names that it is incorporated with. And we're getting all of this with just the click of a button, right? So now our SOC team isn't having to, manually go into Virustotal and copy and paste. Our alerts, we are now able to speed up this process with just a few clicks. And we also have all of these analyzers at our fingertips that we can play around with, and is really, really powerful. And in the next video, I will show you guys how to integrate the Hive and Cortex into one seamless integration. So instead of having to bounce between the Hive and Cortex, everything will pump into the Hive. We will be able to integrate the Hive with Cortex, so we'll be able to interact with Cortex all from the Hive. So we will set up our analyzers. We want to be available to the Hive, and then we will link the two together. So the Hive will be able to make API calls to Cortex and say, all right, hey, I have this observable. Now I want you to run this specific analyzer against it. And now we're not having to bounce back and forth between the Hive's web UI and the Cortex's web UI. So we'll make it even faster and even simpler for our team to use and quickly gather back artifacts around our observables. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when that video drops. And as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.